I'm curious, when considering how to serve classrooms at scale, how do you account for something like culturally responsive or culturally relevant curriculum and pedagogy when culture is ill-defined? So it's literally anywhere in terms of where it's being implemented around the world. So like when I was designing lesson plans for kids in my school, I had different factors to consider for that than when I'm in designing something that I know is being used around the world. So what did you do for that particular area?
Well, Jared, I came here because I thought you were going to know the answer to that question. And that's the big question. Easiest answer first. Don't try to be funny was something that I discovered pretty quickly.
Sounds like there's a story behind that.
Not exactly, but I think when I was talking about the phases of writing, I think early in the course, it really felt like the personalities of the individual writers. Like I could read a lesson and know who wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
I think humor is maybe an example of something that is probably not going to translate. So I don't think that doesn't mean don't be fun or like try to make it have a little bit of a shimmer of whimsy or excitement or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think that's my easiest first answer. Don't try to be funny. If you're like, this will be funny, I don't think it will be. Certainly not for everybody. But I think beyond that, a really tough thing for me, and I think for a lot of people, is just remembering that once you enter this field of writing at scale, it may not help that much to have spent, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years with one group of students because you're writing for such a breadth of people. And I think you really have to open yourself up to feedback and piloting. And it's disorienting in part because you can't always be there. So I would try to visit classrooms. I live in Seattle. I used to live in Chicago. It was a little harder to find classrooms here. And it was a little harder to find classrooms that weren't, at first at least, that weren't, I'll call it privileged or wealthy schools, basically. I worked in one of the schools. Everyone was fantastic, but it wasn't who we were targeting. And I think knowing you really need to be getting feedback from teachers and students in classrooms that the ones you're saying you actually want to target. If you're saying you want to support Black students, are there Black students in your pilot classrooms? And what is the feedback you're getting from them? And I give that just by way of example. I'm being like very narrow. Sometimes I use terms like underrepresented minorities or whatever. But you say, I think it gets back to your why. Like, this is our goal. This is what we want to do. You need to make sure that's part of your piloting. Did you get your question of how do you design culturally responsive curriculum at scale? I think it's a combination of piloting, pushing yourself really hard about what your assumptions are over and over and over again, and being very open to hearing that they're wrong. And then I would say that I do think there is a little bit of a tension with writing for hundreds of thousands of people and the concept of culturally responsive curriculum design. I don't want to say that to give curriculum writers everywhere a free pass, but I think what it does mean, like, oh, you don't have to do it. Like, write for yourself. I don't think that's the point. It's not just a burden. We got in this field because we want to do it. It may not make sense. I don't want to make people do things that don't make sense. So I think empowering teachers to understand where the space is to make curriculum culturally responsive and explaining to them how they might do that or creating spaces for them to talk about how they're doing that is important. I think it is possible, but I'm a little bit suspicious as to whether a class that is taught by a teacher can be culturally responsive if that is not a priority of the teacher. There were things we did. We really tried to be intentional about who was in videos, who was in examples, who do we feature, try to spread that out. But I still think the classrooms where I think it landed, it was because the teacher thought this is a priority, and I think I'm going to try to call out those parts of the curriculum, emphasize them, and make sure this is a part of the experience in my room.
This excerpt of the CSK8 podcast is from episode number 61, which is titled Designing Curricula at Scale with GT Wrobel.